Welcome to AppSec Unlock. I'm your host, Edwin Kwan, and in this episode, we'll be diving deep into what many consider the most persistent security threat: social engineering. We'll explore why humans are often called the weakest link in security, and more importantly, what we can do about it. Let me start with a story about a software developer who received a message on LinkedIn. The profile looked completely genuine, same university, several mutual connections, similar technical background in cloud architecture. And after a week of friendly chat about technical challenges they were both facing in containerization, they shared what seemed to be an innocent GitHub repository with some helpful utilities. Can you guess what happened next? That innocent repository contained a seemingly harmless script that, when executed in the company's development environment, established a persistent backdoor that went undetected for weeks. By the time it was discovered, the attackers had mapped the internal network, elevated privileges, and exfiltrated proprietary code. What makes this attack particularly notable wasn't its technical complexity, it was its patience, personalization, and psychological precision. So let's start by understanding what we're up against. Social engineering has evolved far beyond the Nigerian prince emails of the past. Today's attacks are sophisticated, targeted, and often devastatingly effective. Modern attack vectors have expanded dramatically across multiple channels. Professional networks have become prime hunting grounds. You get LinkedIn connection harvesting, where attackers build networks of hundreds of industry professionals to establish credibility before targeting specific individuals. You also see false job opportunities crafted specifically for your skills and career history, complete with realistic interview processes designed to extract information or credentials. You also see conference speaking invitations to non-existent events that request detailed biographical information or pre-recorded presentation content. And there's also industry group infiltration, where attackers spend months establishing credibility in specialized forums before launching targeted attacks. Not just in professional networks, you also see this in development platforms where technical teams naturally share code. You might get malicious pull requests that introduce subtle vulnerabilities or backdoors that may pass code review if reviewers aren't vigilant. You get compromised packages in legitimate repositories, exploiting the trust developers place in community-maintained dependencies. There could also be false bug reports containing proof-of-concept exploits that actually execute malicious code when the security team investigates. Or you could also have poison repositories that mimic popular libraries with near identical names but contain malicious components. And the last area is through collaboration tools that teams rely on for daily communication. You could have Slack or Teams impersonation using profile photos and names nearly identical to colleagues or executives. There could be false emergency requests that circumvent normal security procedures by creating a sense of urgency. We've also seen deepfake video calls that can now mimic executives with frightening accuracy, complete with voice and mannerism. And lastly, you can also see modified calendar invites that contain malicious links or that redirect to credential harvesting sites. The sophistication of these attacks is increasing exponentially. Last year alone, we saw AI-generated voice attacks that perfectly mimicked executive voices to authorize fraudulent transfers. There were also deepfake video conferences where entire meetings were conducted with AI-generated participants. There were also hyper-targeted spear phishing based on information gathered from months of social media monitoring. And don't forget supply chain social engineering, where attackers compromise vendors first to exploit established trust relationships. The reality is that these attacks work because they exploit the fundamental ways humans build trust and make decisions. And that's what makes them so dangerous. To defend against social engineering, we need to understand why it works. Let's break down the psychological triggers that attackers exploit with remarkable precision. First is using authority to create immediate compliance pressures, and they do that through using false executive emails demanding immediate action, knowing that few employees question direct requests from leadership. They could also use regulatory compliance pressure, invoking legal consequences for non-compliance, therefore triggering risk aversion. And they could also use leadership impersonation that leverages organizational hierarchy to override normal security considerations. They also use urgency to short-circuit our critical thinking through time-sensitive requests that creates artificial deadlines, preventing thorough verification. And after-hours targeting, when support resources are limited and verification is more difficult. There's also social proof, which is used to exploit our tendency to trust what others trust. They could be using industry expert impersonation that leverages the reputation of known security professionals, or conference speaker profiles that create false credibility through association with legitimate events. There could also just be manufactured social validation through fake reviews, comments, or endorsements. Here's what makes this particularly challenging. These triggers aren't bugs in human psychology. They're features. They are the same mechanisms that make us good at collaboration and trust building. The very traits that make teams effective are precisely what attackers exploit. So let's consider this. When was the last time someone in your organization questioned a legitimate request from leadership? Probably rarely, because organizational efficiency depends on trust. Attackers know this, and they weaponize these natural human tendencies. So what are some defensive strategies that we can use? We need a multi-layered approach that acknowledges both technical and human realities. There need to be technical controls that provide essential baseline protection. Things like email authentication using DMARC, SPF, and DKIM to help prevent domain spoofing. There's also multi-factor authentication across systems and digital signature requirements for any financial or security-sensitive instructions. And there's also process controls that help create structure protections, such as verification procedures that require multiple confirmation points for sensitive actions. And then there's human controls that strengthens your most vulnerable and valuable asset. Things like awareness training that goes beyond theoretical knowledge to build practical skills. What you should be doing is to create a trust but verify culture. The goal isn't to make people paranoid, it is to make verification normal. When verification becomes expected rather than exceptional, it removes the social awkwardness that attackers count on. For example, normalize phrases like, "I'll verify that with you directly," or "let me confirm this through our standard channel," as standard responses to requests. This creates an environment where verification isn't seen as distrust, but as professional thoroughness. Now let's get practical about training programs that actually work. You need to have simulation programs that safely expose teams to real-world tactics. Things like phishing campaigns at varying levels of sophistications, from obvious to highly targeted. There could also be scenario-based training that builds critical thinking skills. You can use real-world case studies that analyzes actual attacks and appropriate responses. And lastly, there's also the continuous learning programs that keep security awareness fresh. Things like weekly security tips highlighting recent attack techniques observed in the wild, or monthly challenges that test and reward security-conscious behavior. So here's a framework for building your program that ensures it's both effective and sustainable. Step 1. Make sure you do a baseline assessment to understand your starting point. Understand what the current awareness levels are through anonymous testing or survey. Step 2 is to have training design tailored to your organization, having targeted content for different roles and access levels, and having relevant scenarios that reflect actual threats in your industry. And lastly, step 3, implementation strategy for maximum effectiveness. Have a phased rollout that builds complexity gradually, and make sure you have success metrics that are clearly defined and regularly measured. The key is making training relevant, engaging, and frequent enough to build habits without creating fatigue. Remember, one-off annual training sessions are quickly forgotten. Regular bite-sized learning experiences create lasting behavior changes. So how do we know if our defenses are working? Let's look at key metrics that provide meaningful insight. So you can have some qualitative metrics such as phishing test success rates, track over time, and you can look for improvement trends. You can look at report rates for suspicious activity, where higher numbers often indicate better awareness. And there are also some long-term indicators to review sustained improvement, such as behavior change that persists after specific training initiatives, and process adaptation as teams voluntarily improve security procedures. When measuring success, be careful of creating pervasive incentives. For example, if you punish departments with high phishing click rates, you might discourage reporting of mistakes. Instead, celebrate improvements and create positive reinforcement for secure behavior. The most powerful metric is often the simplest. Are your people becoming better at recognizing, reporting, and responding to social engineering attempts? If yes, your program is working. So as a wrap-up, here are some key takeaways from today's episode. First, social engineering is evolving rapidly, becoming more targeted and sophisticated. Technical controls by itself aren't enough. They must be complemented by human awareness. Psychology matters as much as technology in defending against these attacks. Training must be continuous and relevant, reflecting actual threats your organization faces. Culture is your strongest defense when verification becomes standard practice, and verification should be normalized as professional thoroughness, not exceptional behavior. The goal here isn't to eliminate trust, is to make trust verification a natural part of your workflow. Organizations that balance trust with verification creates environment where collaboration thrives while security risks are minimized. In the next episode, we'll explore secure development lifecycle training and how to build security into every stage of your development processes. But for now, I'd love to hear about your social engineering experiences and defense strategies. This is AppSec Unlocked. I'm your host, Edwin Kwan. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay vigilant and verify.